The massive Imperial fleet hovered over the alien homeworld, its formation a testament to the Empire's dominance. Hundreds of ships, gleaming like silent predators, encircled the planet in an almost perfect halo. The flagship, Eternal Vanguard, stood at the fleet's center, its imposing silhouette casting a shadow even in the void of space. Inside, the air was charged with celebration. Officers toasted their imminent victory, and the hum of machinery blended with the distant sound of laughter. Yet beneath the surface, unease lingered, unspoken but tangible. On the observation deck, Lieutenant Zara Kane stood with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the shimmering planet below. The alien world was beautiful, its surface an intricate mosaic of iridescent blues and greens, yet she could not shake the weight pressing against her chest. Beside her, Commander Rylus Thane exuded the unshakable confidence of a man who had already decided the outcome of the battle. His hands rested on the railing, his eyes scanning the fleet poised to strike. "They'll surrender," Thane said finally, his voice firm, almost dismissive. "They know they can't win. This is the last gasp of a dying faction." Zara didn't respond immediately. Her fingers tightened around the datapad in her hand as she weighed her words. "And if they don't," she asked, "what then? We obliterate their planet? Their civilians? Everything they've built, gone in seconds." Thane turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. "You've seen what they've done, Zara. They've left us no choice. This isn't just war, it's justice. We end it here, and we end it for good." "Justice," she echoed, her tone flat. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Thane frowned. "I know what you're getting at, but this isn't about ethics. It's about survival. They started this war. And we escalated it," Zara shot back, her voice low but sharp. "We've razed entire systems, Thane. Civilians, families, entire cultures gone. At some point, we have to ask ourselves if the cost is too high." The commander looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Finally, he shook his head and turned back to the view. "You've always been too soft for this job, Kane. Or maybe I'm just not blind," she murmured under her breath. A soft chime interrupted their conversation, followed by the voice of the fleet's communications officer. "Commander Thane, Lieutenant Kane, you're needed on the bridge." Zara and Thane exchanged a glance before leaving the observation deck. The bridge was bustling with activity, officers moving between consoles, their faces lit by the glow of holographic displays. At the center of the room, Admiral Corrin loomed over the main tactical display, his expression unreadable. "What's the situation?" Thane asked as they approached. "We've detected unusual energy readings from the planet's surface," an officer reported. "High levels of radiation, fluctuating patterns. It doesn't match anything in our database." Admiral Corrin waved a hand dismissively. "It's irrelevant. Desperate measures from a defeated enemy. Begin the bombardment as planned." "Wait," Zara interjected, stepping forward. "If these readings are an anomaly, shouldn't we investigate? This could be." "It could be nothing," Corrin cut her off. "We're not here to play scientist, Lieutenant. We're here to win a war." Zara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She glanced at Thane, hoping for support, but he avoided her gaze. A group of scientists on the bridge exchanged nervous glances, one of them hesitantly stepping forward. "Admiral, with respect," the scientist began, "we believe this anomaly could pose a significant threat. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. If we could just—" "Enough," Corrin snapped. "Dismissed." The scientist hesitated, his face pale, before retreating to the far side of the bridge. Zara felt a pang of frustration. The Empire's arrogance had always been its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. As the bombardment preparations continued, Zara returned to the observation deck, seeking a moment of solitude. She stared at the planet below, her thoughts racing. Despite her loyalty to the Empire, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The enemy had been cornered, yes, but cornered animals were the most dangerous. Thane joined her moments later, his expression unreadable. "You think I'm wrong," he said quietly. "I think we're too confident," she replied. And I think that confidence blinds us to the risks. Thane sighed, running a hand through his hair. Zara, I know this war has taken its toll on you. It's taken its toll on all of us. But we have to believe in what we're doing. If we start doubting now. It's not doubt, she interrupted. It's caution. And maybe a little humanity. They fell into silence, the tension between them palpable. Below, the planet glimmered like a jewel, oblivious to the destruction that loomed above it. Zara wondered how many lives were about to be snuffed out in the name of victory. She wondered if she could live with herself when it was all over. As the fleet began to mobilize, a sense of foreboding settled over her. Something was wrong, she could feel it. But as she looked around at the confident faces of her comrades, she realized she was alone in her doubts. The Empire was a machine, relentless and unstoppable, and she was just one cog in its vast, unfeeling mechanism. The calm before the storm was always the hardest part. It was the moment when you had to confront your fears and doubts, knowing that soon they would be drowned out by the chaos of battle. Zara just hoped she was wrong. For everyone's sake. The fleet moved into position, and the bombardment began. From the observation deck, Zara watched as the first wave of missiles streaked through the void, their trails a stark contrast against the planet's iridescent glow. Explosions rippled across the surface, turning lush landscapes into fiery wastelands. The fleet's officers cheered, their voices a collective exhale of months of tension and effort. Yet as the bombardment continued, Zara's unease deepened. The energy readings from the planet's surface weren't diminishing, if anything, they were growing stronger. On the bridge, the atmosphere shifted from triumph to confusion. "Admiral, the anomaly is intensifying," a technician reported, his voice edged with alarm. "Energy levels are spiking across multiple spectra. It's unprecedented." "Stay the course," Koren barked. "They're trying to bluff. We'll finish this." But the growing anomaly wasn't a bluff. Beneath the planet's surface, tectonic shifts released an ancient power long dormant. The ground split apart, revealing a rift of swirling green light. From this chasm emerged something that defied logic and expectation, a massive warship, its scale dwarfing even the Eternal Vanguard. Its hull seemed to ripple with an otherworldly energy, green plasma tendrils sparking and coiling like living things. The shields it deployed shimmered with a brilliance that blinded sensors and cast eerie reflections across the fleet. On board the alien warship, General Kale Oren stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the display before him. He was a tall figure with hardened features, his uniform a stark contrast to the advanced yet aged technology surrounding him. The warship, known as the Emissary, had been a relic of a forgotten time, gifted by an extinct race that once ruled the stars. Kale had activated it as a last resort, knowing it could either save his people or doom them entirely. "Our ancestors believed this ship was a weapon of liberation," Kale said, addressing his officers. "But today it is a weapon of vengeance. The Empire has taken everything from us. Today we take something back." "Remember," he said, patting the mech's console, "no matter what happens, always smile. It freaks them out." He gave the order, and the Emissary unleashed its power. A single beam of green plasma erupted from its prow, slicing through the void with precision and fury. 3 Imperial battleships disintegrated in an instant, their shields offering no resistance. The explosion lit up the darkness, and chaos erupted within the fleet. Silver Vortex's circuits rearranged into a grinning face. "Understood." On board the Eternal Vanguard, alarms blared and officers shouted over one another. "We've lost contact with the front line," someone yelled. "They're firing again, brace for impact." Zara gathered her team for one last strategy session. "All right, squad," she said, her voice brimming with confidence. "We've got the mechs, we've got the skills, and most importantly, we've got style. Let's show the galaxy what humanity's all about." Flash raised a fist. Chaos. Kane gripped the edge of the tactical table, his knuckles white. "All ships, open fire on that vessel. Concentrate everything we've got." "Exactly," Zara replied with a grin. Let's do this. The fleet scrambled to respond, launching waves of missiles and energy blasts at the emissary. But nothing penetrated its shields. Meanwhile, a secondary assault began to take hold. Imperial ships reported critical system failures as a viral attack, originating from the emissary, spread through the fleet. Advanced targeting systems glitched, engines faltered, and communications fizzled out. The day of the race dawned with an air of tense anticipation. Zara stood at the starting line, hands on her hips, surveying the course with the kind of excitement usually reserved for kids at a theme park. The humans had named it Thunderdome, a title that evoked images of grandeur and chaos. The aliens, on the other hand, had taken one look at the towering ramps, gravity-assisted jumps, and flaming hoops and dubbed it a death trap. Both sides, however, agreed on one thing: this event was going to be unforgettable. Zara rushed to the engineering deck, bypassing frantic crew members as she went. "What's the status?" she demanded, arriving at the control hub. "It's a viral lockdown," one of the engineers replied, sweat dripping down his face. "It's targeting our digital infrastructure. Every advanced system we've got is compromised." Tikor Valera stood near the main console, a permanent scowl etched into his features. The mechs were lined up at the starting line, their modified exteriors gleaming under the artificial sunlight. Inferno X1, Meteor Stride, Golden Comet, Phantom Surge, and Silver Vortex stood out like brightly colored, flame-spewing beacons amidst the more traditional alien mechs. Tikor tapped his claws against the console as he addressed the gathered crowd. "Then we go analog," Zara said firmly. "Strip down the systems to their bare essentials. Use manual overrides wherever possible." The engineers hesitated, but Zara's tone left no room for argument. They began rerouting power and activating backup systems, a painstaking process that required hands-on effort in a war zone where seconds mattered. Back on the bridge, Thane was doing everything he could to maintain order. "Reroute all functional ships to protect the Vanguard," he ordered, "and someone get those scientists back up here. If they know anything about this anomaly, now's the time to speak up." Despite his orders, the fleet's confidence was crumbling. The emissary continued its assault, its plasma beams cutting through ships like paper. Fighter squadrons attempted to engage, only to be obliterated by strange, cloud-like countermeasures that dissolved their vessels on contact. Meanwhile, General Kale Oren watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. To him, this wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. His people had suffered under the Empire's genocidal campaigns, their homes destroyed, their culture erased. This battle was more than retaliation, it was a declaration that they would not go quietly into extinction. Kyle's second-in-command approached him. "The fleet is falling apart, General, but they're not retreating." "They won't," Kale replied. "Not yet. Their pride won't allow it." On board the Eternal Vanguard, Zara's efforts to bypass the viral lockdown began to bear fruit. Some of the ship's older systems flickered back to life, giving the crew a glimmer of hope. But the damage had already been done. The fleet's losses were mounting, and even with restored functionality, they were outmatched. In the chaos, Zara and Thane found themselves in the command center, facing the grim reality of their situation. "We can't win this," Zara said, her voice low but steady. "We need to retreat." "Retreat?" Thane shot back, his eyes blazing. "Do you know what that would mean?" "The Empire doesn't retreat, Zara. We don't surrender." "This isn't about pride," she countered. "It's about survival. If we stay, we lose everything." Before Thane could respond, a new alarm sounded. The anomaly had grown stronger, and another warship began to emerge from the planet's surface. This one was even larger than the emissary, its design sleeker and more menacing. The sight of it rendered the bridge silent. Zara turned to Thane, her expression one of disbelief. "You knew," she said, realization dawning. "You knew there was a second anomaly, didn't you?" Thane didn't deny it. "We had intel suggesting the possibility, but nothing concrete." "I thought." "You thought wrong," Zara snapped. "You gambled with all our lives, and now we're paying the price." Thane looked away, his shoulders heavy with guilt. For the first time, his unwavering confidence faltered. "I thought we could end this," he murmured. The fleet's situation was now critical. Ships were breaking formation, some attempting to flee while others continued the futile assault. The Eternal Vanguard itself was barely operational, its hull scarred and its systems failing. Zara glanced at the tactical display, her mind racing. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. As the second warship fully emerged, its weapons powered up, casting an ominous green glow across the fleet. Zara realized that their chances of survival were slim, but she refused to give in to despair. If they were going to die, they would die fighting. The fleet's confidence was gone, replaced by fear and desperation. Zara felt it too, but she pushed it aside. There was still a sliver of hope, and she clung to it with everything she had. The air on the engineering deck was thick with sweat and tension. Sparks rained down as crews worked frantically to reroute power. Zara's orders had set them on an almost impossible task, stripping the ship's advanced systems down to their analog cores. A junior engineer stared at the schematics with wide eyes. "We're cutting off life support to the lower decks," he asked, his voice trembling. "We don't have a choice," snapped his supervisor. "We need the shields at full capacity, or there won't be a ship left to argue about." Somewhere nearby, another system overloaded with a deafening crack, sending a wave of heat through the confined space. The junior engineer hesitated before finally following orders, his hands trembling as he rerouted power. A soft hum signaled that the shields had stabilized at the cost of hundreds of lives in the lower decks. In the hangar, a squadron of fighter pilots prepared for what felt like a suicide mission. Their leader, Captain Mira Sael, adjusted her helmet, her face unreadable beneath the reflective visor. The pilots exchanged glances, the weight of their task evident in the grim silence. Mira climbed into her cockpit and powered up her fighter, the controls flickering erratically from the viral attack. She ignored the warnings, focusing instead on the enemy warship looming ahead. "Stay tight," she said over the comms. "Our target is their shield generators. We break through those and the fleet has a shot." The fighters launched in formation, streaking toward the emissary like angry hornets. As they approached, the alien warship responded with its strange, cloud-like countermeasures. The shimmering clouds expanded outward, seemingly harmless at first. But as the fighters entered, their hulls began to dissolve, their structures crumbling into fine particles. Mira watched in horror as one by one, her squadron vanished into nothingness. She managed to pull out at the last second, her ship shaking violently as the edges of her wings began to erode. The comms crackled with static, punctuated by screams that abruptly went silent. On the surface of the planet, alien civilians gathered in the ruins of their cities, watching the battle unfold in the skies above. The emissary's retaliation had given them hope, a rare and precious thing after years of imperial oppression. Families huddled together, their eyes fixed on the streaks of light and distant explosions. An elder held a child close, whispering words of comfort and defiance. Though they knew the cost of this fight, they cheered each time an Imperial ship fell, their voices rising in a chorus of resilience. Back on the Eternal Vanguard, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The flagship was taking heavy fire, its once imposing hull now scarred and fractured. A direct hit rocked the ship, throwing Zara and Thane to the floor. Emergency lights flickered as smoke filled the corridors. "We need to get to the command center," Thane said, pulling Zara to her feet. His tone carried urgency, but his eyes betrayed doubt. The two officers made their way through the chaos, passing injured crew members and malfunctioning systems. When they reached the command center, the scene was one of controlled panic. Tactical displays showed the fleet in disarray, with more ships falling by the minute. Thane barked orders, trying to rally the remaining forces. Regroup around the Vanguard. Protect the flagship at all costs. Zara, meanwhile, studied the tactical readouts with growing dread. The anomaly's energy readings were spiking again. There's something else, she muttered, her fingers flying over the console. Moments later, her fears were confirmed. Another warship was emerging from the planet's surface, its design even more advanced than the emissary. The sleek, angular vessel radiated power, its weapons already charging. Zara turned to Thane, her voice cold and accusatory. "You knew this was a possibility, didn't you?" Thane hesitated, his usual confidence replaced by a rare flicker of uncertainty. There were reports, rumors about a second anomaly. But we couldn't wait. If we delayed, they might have mobilized it before we got here. "So you gambled," Zara said bitterly. "You gambled with every life in this fleet." "I made a call," Thane shot back, his voice rising. "We had to act. If we didn't take the risk, the entire empire could have been at stake." Zara stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. "You don't see it, do you? This isn't about the empire anymore. It's about your pride, your need to win at any cost." Before Thane could respond, another blast shook the Vanguard. This time, the damage was catastrophic. The hull was breached, and warning sirens blared as decompression alarms sounded. "Seal off the compromised sections." Thane ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get the shields back up." Zara grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "We can't win this. You know that. It's time to retreat." Thane wrenched his arm free, his expression torn between anger and despair. "And leave the empire to burn." "If we stay, there won't be an empire left to save," Zara said, her voice steady but urgent. Another explosion rocked the ship, and a console nearby burst into flames. Crew members scrambled to contain the damage, their faces pale with fear. Zara turned back to the tactical display, her mind racing. The second warship was now fully operational, its weapons slicing through the fleet with precision. The emissary continued its assault, its plasma beams carving through the remains of the Imperial Armada. On the surface, alien civilians watched as the tide turned decisively in their favor. Some wept with relief, while others raised their fists in triumph. For the first time in years, they felt the stirrings of hope, a fragile thing, but powerful nonetheless. In the command center of the Eternal Vanguard, Zara and Thane faced a grim reality. The fleet was broken, their forces decimated. Thane slumped against the console, the weight of his decisions finally catching up to him. Zara stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "We have to send a retreat order. Now." Thane met her gaze, his expression hollow. After a long pause, he nodded. "Do it." Zara activated the comms, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "All ships, this is Lieutenant Kane. Fall back. Repeat, fall back. Retreat to the designated coordinates and regroup." The message was met with a mix of relief and despair. Some captains complied immediately, while others hesitated, unwilling to abandon the fight. But one by one, the remaining ships began to pull back, their engines flaring as they turned away from the battlefield. As the fleet retreated, the Eternal Vanguard remained behind, its damaged systems unable to support a jump to hyperspace. Zara looked at Thane, their differences momentarily forgotten. "We're not getting out of this, are we?" Thane shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "No, but at least we bought them a chance." The second warship targeted the Vanguard, its weapons charging for a final strike. Zara braced herself, her thoughts a jumble of regrets and resolve. In her heart, she knew this was the end, but she refused to go down without a fight. The last thing she saw was the green glow of the enemy's weapons, brighter than the stars. The bridge was a scene of chaos, but Zara Kane's voice cut through the noise like steel. Thane lay slumped against a shattered console, blood seeping through the fabric of his uniform. The medics worked frantically, but it was clear he would not be returning to command. Zara knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but filled with the weight of understanding. "Zara," he rasped, his voice weak. "You have to. See it through. She nodded, her throat tight. I will. As Thane was carried away, Zara stood and faced the fractured remains of the command crew. Her voice was calm, steady. All remaining ships, listen carefully. This is Lieutenant Kane. We're not going to hold this position. Break formation and retreat immediately. The response was not unanimous. Fear and despair gripped the fleet, and many captains hesitated, unwilling to leave their flagship behind. Zara gritted her teeth. Do not waste this chance. The Eternal Vanguard will cover your escape. Her resolve silenced the objections. Engines flared to life as the remnants of the fleet began to pull away. But the enemy warship, the Emissary, moved to intercept, its green plasma tendrils sparking with ominous energy. Aboard the alien vessel, General Cale Oren stood before a broadcast console. His face, stern and weathered, filled every remaining Imperial screen. To the empire that has brought ruin to countless worlds, he began, his voice cold and unyielding. Know this, your era of domination ends here. Today is not merely your defeat, it is justice for those you've silenced, a reckoning for the destruction you've wrought. Zara listened, her jaw tightening. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. As much as she despised what the Empire had become, she also knew the cost of its collapse would be unimaginable. Chaos would spread like wildfire, leaving countless worlds vulnerable. There was no clear path forward, only choices made in the thick of desperation. Prepare for impact, someone shouted, jolting her from her thoughts. The Emissary unleashed another devastating plasma beam, its green energy carving through the last of the retreating ships. Escape pods ejected in a desperate bid for survival, their occupants drifting helplessly in the void. Zara clenched her fists. Enough, she said under her breath. Turning to the tactical officer, she issued a final command. Plot a collision course with that warship. The officer hesitated, his eyes wide. Lieutenant, that's suicide. I know, Zara said, her voice steady. We're not making it out of this, but we can give the others a chance. Send word to the remaining captains. Tell them to draw the emissary's fire. We'll make an opening. Orders relayed. Zara took the helm herself. The Eternal Vanguard groaned under its own weight as the engines surged to life. From the observation deck, the emissary loomed larger and larger, its shields a shimmering barrier between survival and oblivion. The remaining Imperial ships engaged in a desperate assault, their weapons battering the alien vessel's defenses with everything they had. For a moment, Zara thought it might not be enough. Then the shields flickered. Now she shouted, pushing the Vanguard to its limits. The massive ship lurched forward, closing the gap. The emissary turned its firepower on the Vanguard, green plasma beams tearing through the flagship's hull. Alarms blared, and sparks erupted from every console, but Zara didn't waver. As the Vanguard drew closer, she activated the ship's emergency transmission system. Her face appeared on every Imperial channel, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. To the Emperor, she began, and to anyone else listening, I need you to understand what brought us here. This defeat was not inevitable. It was the result of arrogance, of pride, and of decisions made without regard for their consequences. We ignored the warnings. We dismissed the risks, and now we are paying the price. The console flickered as the damage to the ship worsened. Zara's voice grew stronger, more determined. The Empire can survive this, but only if it learns from its mistakes. Only if it chooses to value life over conquest, wisdom over power. If you don't, then we were always doomed. The transmission cut off as a final explosion tore through the Vanguard. The emissary's shields collapsed just as the Imperial flagship collided with its hull. The resulting explosion was blinding, a catastrophic eruption that consumed both vessels in a fiery blaze visible from the surface below. On the alien homeworld, civilians watched in awe and horror as the sky lit up. For a moment there was silence, as if the universe itself held its breath. Then a cheer rose from the crowd, a sound of victory, of survival. But beneath the celebration lay the weight of loss, of knowing that the fight was far from over. In the Empire's heart, News of the defeat spread like wildfire. The Emperor sat in his private chambers, staring at the transmission Zara had sent. Her words echoed in his mind, a stark contrast to the silence of the room. The once proud armada was gone, reduced to ashes. The weight of her accusations, the undeniable truth of her message, hung over him like a shadow. On a distant world, a family huddled around a holoscreen, watching the broadcast of the Empire's defeat. The father shook his head, his expression unreadable. "It's over," he murmured. His daughter looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "What happens now?" The question lingered in the air, unanswered. The galaxy stood on the brink of a new era, one defined not by imperial might but by the fragile hope of something different. Whether that hope would lead to peace or plunge the stars into further conflict was anyone's guess. The explosion in the void faded into the stillness of space, a stark reminder of the cost of ambition, of war, and of choices made in desperation. Zara Kane's sacrifice had created a fleeting chance for survival, a single moment in which the course of history might shift. Whether that moment would be enough was a question that only time could answer.